Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the fifth lecture in the Law, Politics, and Media series. My name is Keith Bybee. I direct the Institute for the Study of Judiciary, Politics, and Media, also known as IJPM, here at Syracuse University. And we co-sponsor this lecture series with the Tully Free Speech Institute, which is directed by that man right there, Roy Boom Boom Gutterman, who's known in certain circles. As part of this speaker series, we bring in a variety of distinguished practitioners from the bench, the bar, from the world of policymaking, and from journalism, and they address topics kind of at the intersection of law, politics, and the media. And today, we're fortunate enough to have somebody who can speak with great authority about the intersection between law and journalism. Our speaker is Jennifer Borg, who was until quite recently General Counsel and Vice President of the North New Jersey Media Group, which had ownership of 2 daily newspapers in New Jersey, including the second largest one in the state, and 50 weekly, 50-ish, more than 50, 50 weekly newspapers in the state and their associated websites. Jennifer did all kinds of legal work in her role as General Counsel for the media group. And in particular, she did a great deal of work in assisting journalists in getting access. Journalists must have the ability to gather news in order to then turn around and report it to their readers or their viewers. And there are a lot of legal issues associated with news gathering. And that's what she's going to talk about today. The title of her lecture is With Pen and Gavel, Reporters, How Reporters Fight for Access. I say that we have many regulars in the crowd, so you know the protocol. Jennifer will speak for about 30 or 40 minutes. Then we will have Q&A until 5 o'clock, followed by a reception right here in this room. We always have plenty of food and plenty of beverages to drink, so please stick around for continued conversation. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jennifer Borg.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Bybee. Thank you, Professor Goodman, for having me. So this is informal. I know a lot of you were just in the class I was in previously, but feel free to ask questions or comment along the way. I'm really here for you, so I'm happy to skew what I'm talking about if there's specific questions I can address. So I'm hoping my takeaway for today, and the reason I have this title of With Pen and Gavel, is because I was very, very fortunate to have over 22 years of working beside reporters and editors at our various newspapers, predominantly working with the major daily newspaper, which is The Record, which is also known as the Bergen Record. And luckily, I was 1 floor away from them for most of my career. And I will say the highlight of my career was really working with the reporters and editors. And it was a true testament to the newsroom that they did welcome me. Oftentimes late at night, I'd have a reporter to my left, an editor to the right, and we'd be working on a story. And they'd be there for either pre-publication review, meaning I would be working with the editors and massaging the language, verifying, confirming that they had verified sources, corroboration, looking at the language to see if there were any exposure to the company in terms of legal risk. Was there a way to make it less risky but still have the reader to have the same takeaway? Oftentimes you don't have to use inflammatory or potentially defamatory words like liar or stealing if you don't have a privilege to say so, but you could use other language and have the reader still have the same takeaway. So one of the other parts of my career in working with the newsroom was as Professor Bybee said, was working with the reporters on gaining access. And that could be access to courtrooms that were closed for a variety of reasons. It could be access to court records, which were closed. And I'm sure a lot of you, probably journalists as well, but certainly law students who are taking media law or constitutional law, are reading some of those cases, or soon will be. And also access to what we have in New Jersey. I know we talked earlier about the Sunshine Law. In New Jersey, that's known as the Open Public Meetings Act. So when you refer to the Sunshine Law, you're referring to access to meetings. And today I'm mostly going to be talking about access to government records. I'm going to be focusing on New Jersey law because that's where I've been practicing. It's what I know best. But I've also done some federal work under the Federal Freedom of Information Act. And of course, I've done some work in New York, as you may know. It's the Freedom of Information Law. And I was telling the class earlier that I think New Jersey's is more aptly named because it's not an information law. And I think people get confused about that. It's actually a record statute, with the exception of a couple places where we've litigated was it sloppy drafting on the part of the legislature to use the word information, because it really, what it is it's a records law. So that means that you have to know what the record is that you're seeking, because you have to be able to name it. And sometimes the custodians, who are the people in New Jersey that are charged with providing the records to you, the municipal clerk, the town clerk, is automatically by statute the person responsible as the custodian by statute. After that, it's up to the governing body. It's up to the county or the state to designate a custodian. So in a state where you may have 17 different agencies, from youth services to health human services to attorney general's office to division of law and public safety, they may each have their own custodian. That's not set by statute, but they have to be designated. It certainly helps if you know his or her name, and there may be multiple for each division. But in the absence of that, you can always address your records request to Dear Custodian of Records. One of the other things, I'm not going to go too in the weeds on the statute, but I just want to kind of give you hopefully some practical tips as takeaways, is that it's very helpful to make sure that you are on the good side of these people. It's constantly a tug of war, or at least it has been in my experience. It's very rare that an agency, and this applies to governments, right? Government agencies, it does not apply to private employers or to private entities. It's very rare where they'll say, oh, sure, here it is, and it's tied up in a bow, and they give you a stack of really important papers that you can go write a phenomenal story on. Oftentimes, and I think sometimes the most important stories are the ones that they're fighting, or most important records are the ones that they're fighting the hardest not to give you. Hence the gavel, hence having to have a lawyer by your side who can assist you in navigating the court system and adjudicate, because oftentimes a lot of these records disputes end up in litigation, and then you do need the gavel, you do need the judge who tells you that, yes, you do get access to that records, and tells the custodians and the public agencies that they were wrong to deny you access. So journalism students, look next to the law students and vice versa, because I'm hoping one of your takeaways will be to have a productive working relationship in your respective professions for those of you who are going to be practicing media law and those of you reporters in the room. So I wanted to start with, I gave you my Bruce Springsteen, because I'm a Jersey girl, that he did a lovely parody on the Bridge Gate. Is anyone here from New Jersey? No one? Okay, one, sheepish, two, I know. I know. And are you from North Jersey or South or Mid or? Mid Jersey. Okay, whereabouts? But what's the name? I mean, what county are you in? I say this because I'm actually North Jersey, so for us, kind of Newark is almost central, but Newark, of course, thinks it is north. So, but are you familiar with do you ever travel over the George Washington Bridge? I'm sure some of you not from New Jersey have traveled over the George Washington Bridge. And I don't know how closely any of you have followed this. Probably some of you were still in high school, seriously. It wasn't that long ago. But we received a tip, and the tip actually came from my brother, who was the publisher. It doesn't often happen that way. And he had gotten a phone call from probably somebody in one of those cars that there was an inordinate amount of traffic. Now, this is, I'm told, this is the most widely used bridge in the country. I'm sorry, in the world. I do cross it twice a day, once when I leave Manhattan to go to work and once to come home. And there was a phone call made from my brother's friend who does the commute every day to my brother, and it was more than just there's some traffic problems. He said, this has been going on, what's going on? Maybe it's a news tip, maybe it's not. At that point, people are wondering if there's an accident. I don't think anyone was thinking terrorist attack or what have you. But we do have a position at the company called a road warrior. We're in a very highly dense, congested area of suburban New Jersey. And hence, we have a columnist who's just dedicated to road issues, traffic, what have you. And John Chakowski is his name. And he wrote this story about it being a commuting disaster. And like all investigative reporting or good reporting, you dig and you dig deep and you make phone calls and you call the Port Authority, which handles all the bridge. And this is in Fort Lee, New Jersey, by the way, bedroom community, right, as you can see, right over the George Washington Bridge. This is a toll into Manhattan, and was not getting adequate responses. What happened was Bill Baroni, who, by the way, was just sentenced a couple hours ago to 2 years of prison for his role in what we now dub Bridgegate. This just happened literally a couple hours ago. He was just sentenced for various charges for indictments he was convicted for, including fraud and conspiracy. And at the time, this is prior to us finding out what the real story was, he's the deputy executive director, and he's explaining the traffic study. So the traffic study is that they were going to close these lanes, and they were going to conduct a traffic study to see the commuting patterns over the George Washington Bridge. Answers are still not satisfactory to our road warrior and to a lot of other reporters, and who themselves commute and use the bridge. And I say this because it's kind of like the nose and follow your gut, follow your instincts, because I think that's one of the reasons we broke the story, because a lot of other newspapers had access to the same information, but I don't think they followed it, quite frankly, with the digging and the tenacity and kind of just staying with it. And it's also, and lawyers will say this a lot, as will reporters, sometimes it just doesn't add up. And so you want to peel back that onion, right, and get back to the story and get some better answers, or get answers that actually make more sense. So at this point in the stage, nobody really knows what's going on, but there's a lot of traffic. And we have purported evidence that it's a traffic study because you have a high-ranking public official telling you so. Then what happens, and this is why I'm discussing mostly records, here you have an email from David Wildstein, who subsequently pled guilty, to Bridget Ann Kelly, who was also indicted and convicted with Baroni, who you saw earlier. And I just found out several hours ago, she was just sentenced to 18 months in prison for her role in this Bridgegate scandal. There's an email from Bridget Ann Kelly, from Bridget Ann Kelly to David Wildstein, and it says, time for some traffic problems in Fort Lee. Bridget Ann Kelly, notice please, because we talked about this in class, is using her personal Yahoo account. She works for the governor's office, Governor Christie's office. She's using her personal account, and she is also emailing David Wildstein, a public official at the Port Authority, with his personal Gmail account. He then writes back, got it. And anyone have any comments on those? Is this the first time anyone's seeing this? It's not a quiz. Everyone seen this email before? Okay, does anyone ever question, well, if it really was a traffic study, or if he didn't know what she was talking about, we're trying to find out who's responsible, and if he says, I knew nothing about it, why do you email back, got it? Right? Doesn't got it make it sound like we've had a conversation before, that something's planned and maybe there is a conspiracy? So this was the smoking gun. You don't often see this in journalism, right? You don't often get one document, really, quite frankly, one sentence, a couple words, which now has led to 2 people going to prison for, I think, a long time. And that was it. So our reporter, and I wish I had a picture of him. I really did not do justice to not having that. I have a wonderful video that we can show you later. Sean Broberg, at 3:30 in the morning, it's kind of ironic. I was up early because I do my best writing really early. I kind of peter out at night. I was doing a brief, which, as you know, is anything but. And I was writing a brief to go into court. And I was up early, and he emailed me that he had this in his email and said, you won't believe what I just got, what I just found, what I just got. That I can't tell you because of the shield law. But that's a really good question. It's a really good question. It's a confidential source. Yeah, no, I love that question. Everybody ended up getting it later pursuant to a subpoena that Wisniewski had.
I have followed this
Yep.
quite well. Okay. I know about the Christie and how the whole play. But it's interesting how this got to you, and how did it get to you?
Mm-hmm.
And how did it get to your brother or your...
Well, nothing got to my brother. He just got a phone call that there's a heck of a lot of traffic at the GWB. What's going on? And the calls kept...
How did this surface?
This came through a reporter. Our reporter got this. So this,
Isn't there some tapping going on here?
into some, what, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first.
Wiretapping.
Oh, no, not with us. No.
Maybe not,
You never heard the word before. Okay.
No
What?
comment, Louis.
I understand.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. So our reporter got it. Now, I don't know if he got it first. That I don't have no way of knowing. But I know he broke the story. So he then breaks the story. Other people get the email, obviously, later. Now it's widely available, obviously, on the internet. And, oh, I apologize. I must have. And this is the front page of the next day's paper, the hard copy of the paper, which is still online. And that's a picture of Governor Christie with the Bridget and Kelly who said time to create some traffic problems in Fort Lee, written by our former reporter who's now at the Washington Post. Is his final the best reporter I've probably come across. I mean, he's just amazing. And Sean now said it was not a traffic study. It was a payback because the mayor of Fort Lee, Mayor Sokolich, did not endorse Governor Christie during his gubernatorial campaign. So it's payback. So this whole, and maybe for a lot of you who don't come from that area, thinking, what's the big deal? A bridge had a lot of traffic. But, and I can understand maybe the further away you get from New Jersey and New York, it's not that big a deal. But for those of us who live it, eat it, breathe it, it was a huge deal. I mean, so much so that a lot of local residents filed a class action suit. Everything from, my pay was docked at work because I couldn't get to work, to ambulances who couldn't get through the traffic, and maybe people were potentially, having more serious injuries, or I don't know if there was ever a fatality. But there was a lot of the aftermath of what transpired and people misusing the official misconduct and crimes being committed by creating the traffic jam. And I think it was hard for a lot of people to fathom that they went that far just for retribution on a local Democrat who did not endorse Governor Christie. What also came out, which didn't make as much press, is that I think Wildstein had also called Mayor Sokolich the little Serb. And it was really, a slight insult to him. And then he ended up saying, well, I'm actually Croatian, but if I weren't, it still bothers me. And so a lot of emails came out that led to a lot of other people resigning, as I like to call it, because of their, never put it in writing, right? Because there was a lot of nastiness going around, name calling and what have you. So this is the story that we broke. And I think I just want to give you a little bit of the press conference, because I want to give you a little bit. And I'm not going to bore you with him saying how Governor Christie later on in this press conference says he found out about this from us. He goes, I didn't know about it until I read it in the Bergen Record. But I want to give you a little bit of this, because this is when it's still new news, right? This has just happened.
Come out here to this office where I've been many times before. And I come out here today to apologize to the people of New Jersey. I apologize to the people of Fort Lee, and I apologize to the members of the state legislature. I am embarrassed and humiliated by the conduct of some of the people on my team. There's no doubt in my mind that the conduct that they exhibited is completely unacceptable and showed a lack of respect for their appropriate role of government and for the people that we're trusted to serve.
Yeah, you can go to the second part, which I think is.
Than I did. But I believe I have an understanding now of the true nature of the problem, and I've taken the following action as a result. This morning, I've terminated the employment of Bridget Kelly, effective immediately. I terminated her employment because she lied to me. I brought my senior staff together, I think about 4 weeks ago, tomorrow, and I put to all of them one simple challenge. If there is any information that you know about the decision to close these lanes in Fort Lee, you have 1 hour to tell either my Chief of Staff, Kevin O'Dowd, or my Chief Counsel, Charlie McKenna. I told them that in an hour I was going to go out in a press conference, and if no one gave me other information to the contrary.
So that just gives you a taste for, again, in the beginning of the scandal, he fires Bridget Ann Kelly. Later on, he tells you, which I never would advise anybody because I used to be an employment lawyer in my prior background. He fired her without talking to her, and he said, because I didn't have to, I know she lied to me. But there was also conversation in there about going, and this is one of the reasons as a reporter and lawyer for reporters, we had a hard time getting access to a lot of information because the two men that he referenced about how he told other people to come to them were lawyers. So this whole idea of always having a lawyer in the room, because law students, the attorney-client privilege. So the attorney-client privilege was a very, very hard privilege to pierce, which we never obviously fully pierced, when it came to investigating who knew what and when. And I think, you have this statement from Christie, but you still don't know what happened when. And the other thing that came up is that, Bridget Ann Kelly, was she just taking the fall for Christie or his higher ups? Did Bridget Ann Kelly really have that kind of authority with the Port Authority to make sure all this happened? Who was she working in concert with? So there was a lot of other digging to do. And I think I just say this to you as everyone thinks the story is the email, but it was the big story, and it was the smoking gun story. And we know that today because 2 people are going to jail for it, and somebody else is pleading guilty and is yet to be sentenced. But there were a lot of stories along the way. And so if I don't want to use the word lazy, but you want to dig deep and see, well, what else is there? This doesn't make sense. She wasn't that high up an official. Who else knew? Who knew what when? And that's where you can you talk to your legal team, talk to hopefully even in-house counsel, if not, talk to outside counsel, and try to get access to records and start working and obviously developing sources. One of the things we did do as a result, or in the wake of Bridgegate, so there was a launch into Wisniewski, the chairman of the Transportation Committee. So there were 2 investigations going on at the state level. There was a third, and they ended up consolidating. The Senate had one as well as the Assembly. And then, and you probably know this better than I know this, and then there was a federal investigation, which ended up in these federal indictments of Bridget Ann Kelly and Bill Baroni, and that's their attorneys in the back. So we conclude with their, as I said, their sentencing today. I'm sorry, I keep going the wrong way. This is, I just show as a slide because this is David Wildstein, who pleaded guilty. This is the slide, I believe it came, the New York Times had said that there's been a lot of rumors in the journalism field in the New York metropolitan area as to who knew what when. And people have surmised that on September 11th, right, because the lane closures were September 9th through the 13th of that year, that Governor David Wildstein told Governor Christie. And it was interesting because one of the journalists said, there's a photo out there, and that photo is going to show that they were talking and maybe even laughing about it. And we don't know, so I don't want to, we don't know, but there was some kind of gossip or a conversation going on that Wildstein, I believe, even claimed that he told the Governor Christie this day. I'm not saying it's this minute, to be clear, but that he had said it that day.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I think that during that trial, that Wellstein claimed he did tell Christie
Yes.
about it.
Yes.
And that Christie basically was the trigger on the gun that started
Yes.
it.
Yep.
They're claiming that these guys did not have the authority to do that or didn't even have the capacity to think the concept out to get even with that mayor in Jersey.
Right. Right.
That's what I think.
Right. No, and Wildstein said Christie knew. So and a lot of other people knew. I think there are other names that came up. So one of the issues, again, is who knew what when. And I really do think, and I hope I'm not overstating it, but a lot of people credit this story with one of the reasons he's not our president or wasn't our presidential candidate is because this was his fall from grace. Because he won by a landslide in the governor race prior. But this really had tarnished him, and he never built it back, notwithstanding his huge denials. And then he himself, which is coming up, his office also started its own investigation, and they hired a very well-reputed, recognized firm called Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher. And Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher did its own report, which the press was very scathing about and said it was really just exonerated Christie, and it really kind of threw other people under the bus, and that he wasn't taking any responsibility. And when we heard about this investigation, one of the things our reporters, our newsroom said, well, who's paying for these high-priced New York, LA lawyers? And sure enough, the taxpayers were. So one of the things that our reporters did was, well, what are we funding and how much? Because the report was so darn weak, notwithstanding the fact that it took months. And I will show you the prices because I think it's staggering. And I'm continuing to go the wrong way. I got to turn this over. Oh, this was just some other headlines of jam and toast. And this was that, it was 170-minute self-serving, self-pitying display of contrition. This is Fire's Aid, Ignorance is Chris. I've already gone through the open records. I'll go through that in a bit. So what happens are the bills. I'll go through that. This is Michael Juniak, who was the then press secretary, spokesman for Governor Christie. And the reason I have this slide in here is that we believe, the first news outlet to actually use the Open Public Records statute to seek access to email correspondence, but we didn't limit it to email correspondence between certain officials at the Port Authority, right? Because we know Wildstein's at the Port Authority, and he's now part of it. And Bridget Ann Kelly, it was before Bridget Ann Kelly's name came up. It was in December. Michael Wildstein, Governor Christie, and various officials in the governor's office. And we also asked for his emails. And our records request was filed on December 17th. And about 7 days later, which was the due date, they wrote back to our reporter and said, we have searched for records responsive to your OPA request and have found that there are none whatsoever. This is December again, before the January that it broke. We then, pursuant to a leak, get probably this amount of emails. So what does the reporter do? The reporter shows up at my office and says, well, that's really interesting that they denied our request in total and said that they have none, because I'm holding a whole stack. So I went, oh my gosh. We went into the room next door, the conference room. We spread them all out. We wanted to verify that they were truly responsive, that there wasn't any bickering over, we asked for this date, they didn't get, we didn't ask for the right dates. We went through it, and I said, we've got to sue. We're holding documents. They either lied and either didn't search and told us they did, or they searched and found something and they're lying and said they didn't find any, or somebody destroyed them, or somebody's just, is it incompetence and lack of training, or is it official misconduct and perhaps criminal? So one of our first Bridgegate suits was in response to the emails, and I show this because all he did in that lawsuit was tell us how he didn't bother searching his emails because he knew that he had nothing to do with Bridgegate. And the judge was really pretty attuned to it, and she said, well, that wasn't the request. The request wasn't for you to search emails you sent, right? You actually have a duty to search for your emails. And she sent them all back to the table to search, and sure enough, they came back with a stack like this. And we were withholding about that much because we wanted to see what they came back with. I have no duty to tell them what I have, right? So they come back with this, and we go back to the judge, and we said, well, that's great. They gave us probably 90%, but we're holding still more. And so we went through this very intense litigation with the Governor Christie's office, but about what kind of search did they conduct, and was it reasonable, right? Did they conduct a search? It was reasonable. Who conducted the search? To this day, years later, we still don't know who authored that. We've conducted a search and found none, and we don't even know who the custodian is. So I'm now on appeal in that case. So we're just getting stonewalled again and again and again on our cases, as well as on getting access to records. One of the things, obviously, our reporters wanted to know is, what is this law firm billing, and what are they billing for, and what kind of work are they doing? And these are the records. So you ask for billing records, right, from the law firm. You get access to billing records. That's almost 101. I'm sure every state it's taxpayers' money being spent. You should get it. And in New Jersey, they think it's so important that you don't even have a 7-day waiting period. You're given immediate access to bills, all bills, because it's financial data, and obviously the public has a right to know what the government is spending its money on. So here is what we get. And we're like, what? And it was interesting because at the same time as we're doing this, we're now saying there has to be some kind of restrictions on what kind of firms they're allowed to use and what kind of billing procedures. And I only know that because I'm a lawyer and I worked at a law firm in New York, and I know that insurance companies have a specific, and so we're able to send an OPA request and get access to their outside counsel guidelines. And we find that they're not even following them. So the law firm that is doing the investigation is supposed to be following these outside attorney guidelines, and they themselves are not following them, because I don't think you can tell necessarily on this. They're doing some block billing, and there was one attorney who worked like a 14-hour workday, and they said, we don't pay for anything over X amount of hours. So this led to other stories as to what are they spending their money on, are the people, and then they had some e-discovery people, were they qualified to be doing e-discovery? And there were also some that were so unredacted, and we felt that they were so purposely vague, because they knew reporters were going to ask for these, right? So they probably purposely put in these really kind of vague, general billing entries. By the same token, if you were a lawyer responsible for reviewing, does it sound right that Christian Hudson spent half an hour on that? You know, you have a fiduciary obligation, right, to the taxpayers to actually review the bills, and you have to do it meaningfully, right? You can't just cursory sign your approval and say, okay, taxpayers in New Jersey, you're paying $14 million to this law firm for this. So that was also an important, we had, you know, ethicists and other people telling us, like, look, how are they performing any meaningful review when the bills are so vague? By the same token, lawyers, future lawyers in the room, when you do billing, you don't want to put secrets and attorney-client privilege material in bills, because they are usually subject to Open Public Records Acts. So this started sorry, I just have to turn it this way. I'm getting dyslexic on this. No, I'm going the right way. I'm sorry. So then what happened was they used the attorney-client privilege as an exception, which most record statutes have, for withholding a lot of the conversations or a lot of the billing entries. And we were able to get some of those en masse, but certainly not all of them. So this was just a compilation we did as of November. I'm sorry, 11.2 million went to Gibson Dunn and Stroh's, which was its e-discovery expert. Fort Lee itself incurred almost $250,000 for Mayor Sokolich and others in his employ in the city of Fort Lee's employ to participate in the investigations. So there was the Gibson Dunn investigation, there were 2 state ones, and there was a federal. This is a lot of money, $14.6 million. I'm going to come to that last. Legislative Investigative Committee fees were 1.2. That was just for the legislature to hire Jenner Block in Manhattan to represent them. So the committee within the government had its own law firm. And then Port Authority, indemnification, and state employees. This is a case that I lost, and it didn't just piss me off because I lost it. It was really the wrong result. What had happened was a lot of the employees who had to appear for, right, how do you investigate? You talk to people. So when employees either received a subpoena from the government or Gibson Dunn called them and said, I'd like to, we're investigating the wrongdoing and who knew what, when, and what have you, please come to our office and we're going to investigate you. State employees and Port Authority employees who were asked to testify or to give information called lawyers, right? I'm not going to participate in this investigation without a lawyer. So the rules are, they then contact the Attorney General in New Jersey and seek representation and indemnification from the state, because they're being called as part of the investigation as part of their work, right? So they're saying, if I'm going to be out of pocket $17,000 because I have to hire a lawyer to come with me to 5 days of a hearing, you, state of New Jersey, should be reimbursing or paying my lawyer directly. That's not a bill I should be incurring on behalf of myself. So I was successful in winning a lawsuit and getting the state to turn over to the reporters the retention agreements between the various law firms and lawyers and the employees. But what they did is they redacted the names of the employees under the attorney-client privilege. And there's only one case in New Jersey on point, and I think it's a poorly written decision, and I think it's absolutely the wrong result. And they said that basically in almost all events, the name of a client or potential client is privileged attorney-client privilege material. And we took that up for cert, and the Supreme Court in New Jersey denied cert on it. So the appellate division still stands. But in other states, you would get to know, particularly if you're funding, the taxpayers are funding these legal bills, you would get to know. And we also said, like, the public is not stupid. And you're going to get this a lot when you're writing about arrests. Everyone knows an arrest is not, a conviction. People are presumed innocent until guilty. And that's what we argued, that there's not going to be a harm to reputation knowing that Jennifer is part of the investigation, or that Jennifer hired a lawyer to participate in the investigation. Everyone knows it's still an investigation. It doesn't impart any kind of criminality or criminal conduct on my part, but we just lost it. It was just one of those things that maybe if we had had a different panel on the appellate division, we would have gotten a different result. So I think that was an important, again, how documents, you need to get lawyers to help you get them. And when you get them, these were really important stories that we were writing. This is another great one. Karen Rouse, who's now at WNYC. Hurricane Sandy, anyone here impacted? Hopefully not dreadfully, but were you in a state where Sandy came through? If you were here, must have, right? Okay, so Hurricane Sandy, this is I don't know if it's New Jersey Transit, Amtrak, or both, rail tracks, and this is the damage caused by boats in Sandy, Hurricane Sandy. And what had happened is, I don't know how many of you know traditional, I'm using the word traditional because I don't know what else to call it, but in our newspaper, it's like a lot of newspapers, you have a beat writer who may be covering a certain beat or a certain geography, and Karen was the transportation. So her beat was transportation in New Jersey, whether it's a ferry or it's rails or trails, not to be confused with the road warrior, and not to be confused that we also had Sean Boberg, who's the Port Authority. The Port Authority is so big that they have their own reporter designated. So Karen's, and not many transportation people think they're going to lead to an executive director's resignation, but good for her. It's exactly what happened. Again, we kind of got a smoking gun here. And what happened was we asked for the New Jersey Rail Operations Hurricane Plan. And this is what we got back. So this is a fully redacted, except for the title, plan. Now, how as a lawyer do you go into court and say, Your Honor, all these redactions are improper? Because I can't even see what's redacted. So how do I argue that, that's not attorney-client, or it's not advisory, consultative, and deliberative privileged material? How do you argue against a blank document? They had argued, and I think you were asking earlier about security. They said, we're redacting it because of security issues. So I just put in the Oprah exemption here. But they said that it would create a risk to the safety of persons or property if they had disclosed, and that was the reason why they had to make those redactions. Well, we took them to court, and here's what the judge ruled. Voila. So this wasn't even a close case of, okay, I got one, sometimes I get one word unredacted or two words unredacted. This was a full-blown wholesale redacted document that we got almost, with the exception of minor, maybe two small redactions, was for all intents and purposes unredacted. And a result of getting that, and this, by the way, this is just an example of what the MTA, the Metropolitan Transit Authority in New York, had. So this was their plan that they gave to reporters willy-nilly. So again, that also helped augment our argument that how important and how sacrosanct and secret are these. And what it led to was this story. NJ Transit didn't follow its own storm plan. So what Karen did is she read now that we have this unredacted plan, she's reading it. We had also asked when we sued for access to emails, which we did get. And the reason they were fighting us on the emails was because guess what? It showed culpability, right? I mean, they're not going to say, oh, here, take these. It shows how much I wasn't doing my job properly. And what we found out is that they had a plan in place for this kind of disaster. And Sandy didn't come up overnight. Everyone knew that it was coming. There were days to prepare. And they were supposed to move these rail cars and equipment from low-lying areas of, I'm sure, towns you've heard of, or cities you've heard of, like Hoboken and Kearney. And they were supposed to move them to higher ground so that they wouldn't be damaged. And the emails show that they not only knew about the plan, but they were discussing it. And guess what? They still didn't do it. So they didn't even follow their own plan. It's one thing to not have a plan and not know what you're doing. It's another thing to have it. There's a process in place for following it, and you don't follow it. And again, we don't really get to speak too much to see what the conversations are like with the employees, like who's losing their job, who's not, because there's a personnel exception, and discipline is not disclosable with only minor exceptions in New Jersey. So this is what happened. He resigns. And I thought that was just a real coup for Karen, because it was really tremendous investigative journalism on her part to kind of keep digging, know to call. As I said, I didn't do the work. She knew to call me. And we said, this doesn't add up. This isn't right. You know, how can this plan be so top secret if people are supposed to follow it? You know, if there has to be dissemination, I mean, obviously the engineer and they're moving these rail cars, and it was over like $120 million worth of equipment was damaged. I mean, it was really, really bad because they did not follow their plan. And Karen really helped with that. So this was another case that we had, which I'm sorry if I'm yelling. I keep forgetting I have a mic on. So the judge, this is a case where Malik Williams, this is one of my first bigger cases, where he had turned himself in to the police. There was a warrant out for his arrest. And the next thing we know, he's shot dead in a residence garage. So we had been told he was in police custody, and for whatever reason, he's now dead in somebody's garage. And what we had done is he had been shot by police. We weren't sure who. Several units responded, a couple towns, county. I don't recollect off the top of my head whether the state did. And what we asked for was for the video inside the police department, and hopefully privacy or law enforcement, of any law enforcement, you know, you're inside a police department, how do you get video, right? You would think that's a place where they're not going to give it to you because of security reasons and what have you. And the use of force report, which in New Jersey, like a lot of states, if not most states, officers have to complete every time they use force. And it's deadly force, it doesn't matter, any kind of force. And that's a report that if there's information is used as part of an investigation, should there be allegations of a use of excessive force or police brutality. The document's used for lots of things. It's also just used for, you know, the stun guns, the lasers, what have you. So even if you just are fighting with somebody, that's force. And various statistics are compiled. We're not really sure what they do with the compilations and how much they're really studying it. But we know that these documents exist, so we knew to ask for it. And we won. The judge ordered for us to get the report on the teen's death. They had told us we don't get it, the use of force report, because they said it's confidential, it's a criminal investigatory record, and they said that the video was not required to be maintained. I don't want to get in the weeds on the statute. But they had also said that it was an investigation in progress, it could jeopardize the safety of any person, and jeopardize the investigation, be inappropriate to release. But we did win. And I want to show you this briefly. It's not going to be long. So this is the video we did get. So here he is. Here's the Malik Williams. Sadly, this is just hours before he died. And you can't see it here, but he was handcuffed at some point to that bar and unhandcuffed so he could go talk to the officer, then handcuffed again, unhandcuffed, handcuffed again. And see how he just makes a dash for it? So what happened was they had forgotten to handcuff him, or maybe they didn't forget, but whatever it is, they didn't handcuff him to the bar. But if I wasn't going to bore you with showing it, but prior to that, there was constant, they'd take him out, put him back, take him out every time he needed to come up. So he... you can turn it from here. So he just escapes through the door, right? And that's a public interest story. Like, how does somebody who's getting processed for, you know, his warrant, how do they just escape from a police department, no less? And then how do they end up dead in a residence garage? And what happened was, like, so they run out and they're following him, and he's apparently hid in someone's residence, just a normal, you know, just a town residence garage, and he had, I think, an axe in his hand, and he was shot dead by one of the officers. So that was, we thought, another important story, and it kind of went also to these other cases, which I'll talk about briefly, which is, you know, are police using excessive force, and is there racial bias in statistically the disproportionate amount of Black men or men of color who are being, deadly force is being used against them, and police brutality. And if many of you may recall the Eric Gardner case, where he died sadly after this, and he had even said to the officers who were choking him, he had even said, you know, I can't breathe, and all he was doing was selling what they call loosies on the street, loose cigarettes. And this started out a lot of national outcry in terms of police brutality. And just, you can Google this yourself, but where this has ended up is that the Legal Aid Society recently won a case to get access to the police officer's discipline records, and they were going to issue a summary of misconduct that had been, I don't want to say filed, but that had been reported against him, and it's on appeal, and then it got leaked. So the Civilian Complaint Board, somebody leaked the information to the Legal Aid Society, and that person has since resigned from the Civilian Board. So when you see things like police force, again, not necessarily excessive force, it could be justified force, the reporters oftentimes will want to get the, this is his officer history. This was showing you how this is what got leaked. This was a judge ruled you get access to it, but since it's on appeal, there was a stay. But this shows other complaints, allegations, not all of which are founded, by the way, against him. So it may give you background into, is this officer, you know, using, is he been up before for excessive force or not? Has he had, you know, sometimes proper training? So here's an Attorney General notification report. Actually, we were just talking about this for New Jersey, where the police use of deadly force. Here they talked about police officers involved. This I'm really showing you as an example of something that's unredacted. Here's a use of force report that we had, which involved a police shooting, and the names are fully redacted, so we don't know. This is a case that's actually I have before the New Jersey Supreme Court. And in that case, I'm just going back here, what they had said, the court really concentrated, particularly for the lawyers in the room, had really concentrated on the fact that protecting witness security, officer security, they felt that if they had released the name of the officer who shot the decedent, that family members or friends may come and harm the officer and his family. And they also said in this case what had happened was two men were in a stolen car, purportedly about to steal a second car out of a driveway, and a woman saw them, and it was actually her car, and she called 911, and then there was a police chase through like 3 separate towns, and they finally apprehended the men, and there was a driver and the passenger. Different jurisdictions and canine units show up, and there was disconnect between what was being reported. There were certain reports that said that they had driven into a guardrail and that they got stuck. There was another report that they were using their car as a weapon towards the officer, and that was purportedly to explain why the police officer used deadly force. They ended up shooting, and they killed the driver. They did not kill the passenger, and they did find a gun in the car. But the question that we reporters, the newsroom had was, you know, was it justifiable force or excessive force may depend on whether the police officer really had a valid, reasonable belief that the car was being used as a weapon to come at him. One could surely understand how that may escalate and you may be using force in that instant. But if the car, the SUV, is actually stuck at a guardrail and there's smoke coming out of it, how much of an imminent threat is it? Because at this point, we had no reason to believe it. I don't think it ever came out that they knew he had a gun, that there was a gun in the car. We don't even know if anyone had a gun in their possession, like it could have been on the floor. So they had argued that there were really 2 investigations going on. One was into the police chase and these perps fleeing the scene or evading the cops. And the other investigation was into whether or not the police had used justifiable or excessive force. And they said that they wanted to protect the integrity of both and that they didn't want witnesses' statements being, tainted. They didn't want witnesses changing their stories or being tainted if they heard what other witnesses were saying. So they were really putting the wraps on this investigation. That happens a lot in law enforcement. I find law enforcement records are, second to the governor's office in New Jersey, the most difficult to get. And this is part of the public policy part, and that's why a lot of the reading was, you can also understand why they shouldn't be completely open to the public at all times. There is a need for certain investigations to have a cloak of confidentiality, and certainly for a certain amount of time. So whether or not I get those officers' names, now that actually both men died, the second man died in an unrelated gang drug issue in Newark. So both men are now dead, and the officers, there's been a no bill after the grand jury. So the grand jury said that they used justifiable force. So the whole investigation, so to speak, is over. So we had argued to the Supreme Court, there's really no reason, whatever these protections were that you were worried about, they no longer exist. So these are kind of good facts make good law, let's hope. The facts are on our side. It doesn't usually happen that way, that the investigation is closed. So again, I think there's less of a need for the protection of the document. Is that all? I thought I had one more video. That was the Rutherford. This was actually a use of force report that was used in that exact case. Sorry? Oh. This last video I just wanted to, is this Laquan? This last video I just wanted to show you because it goes very similar to, just to kind of highlight the background reading. This was a journalist who, well, I'll let you see the video first. I don't know if anyone remembers this, Laquan McDonald in Chicago. And I'm sorry, it is disturbing, but we'll stop it soon. So there's the perp. They get a phone call that there's somebody who's breaking into vehicles. And the police are responding to the call. And then, I'm sorry, you are going to, so he falls down, he gets shot.
All right, there you see the 17-year-old Laquan McDonald. He was jaywalking there on the street. This is dash cam video from the police vehicle. He is lying there on the street right there. And the police officer, Jason Van Dyke, 37 years old, shoots him. We've stopped that video at that. There's no audio on the video. We've stopped it at that point, but you get the point. Once he
And I bring this to your attention because it was actually, he was a journalism student and dropped out to practice journalism. It was a freelance journalist who was also an Uber driver. And he's the one who actually sued for that dash cam video. And prior to getting that dash cam video, the officers had been exonerated, and their story had said that they felt a threat that this man did have a gun near him, a knife near him. So there were no charges filed against the officers. And there were questions earlier about what's a journalist, what's a blogger, are bloggers always journalists, are they never journalists, who's protected by the Shield Law? And in this case, he sued for the release and won to get the release of the dash cam that was on the police car. But how it's ironic and horrible, he actually wasn't allowed in the press conference when they were releasing the video because he didn't have a press car pass. So the guy who actually acted as a journalist and got this all unmasked was himself not even allowed in the press conference because he didn't have press credentials. And as a result of that video and that dash cam, it obviously completely refuted everything the officers had said. And just recently, I think it was just March, he was indicted on 6 murder charges because he kept firing his weapon even after the decedent had fallen down. So it goes to show that, if these stories had not been brought to light, they would have gotten off. And I think it's a really, really, important dialogue. And I just can't overstate the importance you all play in helping shape public policy and making sure that the, truth gets out there. And it's regrettable, but sadly, I think the need is more and more that you're going to have to litigate to fight for these documents. Not always. And I don't always have to. I mean, the fact that I went to court a lot, you can see. But I don't mean to suggest that every public official has a vendetta against reporters or lawyers who work for them. Some of them are very, very cooperative. Build your sources. I'm sure you hear that. Network, and if you're trustworthy and you can build the trust with them. I've had police officers leak stuff to us. And then in a public face, they may have to tell me, no, you don't get it. No, you don't get it. Another tool, somebody was asking, I think earlier, about protecting sources. We've also been in a situation where I've had a reporter say to me, can we file an OPA request? And I'll say, but you already have the document. And they'll say, but I need to cover someone else, the source's identity. And if it's, their boss will pretty much know I leaked it to you if you write about it or you put it on the web. But if you file an Open Records Act request and get it, then we'll protect my source. So any questions? I thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We do have a few minutes for questions. Yes.
You know, it does depend on the size. Like I was on the 6th floor for the majority of my career there, and they were on the 7th, and it was great because I would just walk upstairs or they'd walk down. There's no other newspaper in New Jersey there is none that has in-house counsel, sadly. So not in New Jersey. I know at the New York Times, I can speak to they have lawyers right there at the headquarters in New York. I don't know about pardon? Syracuse is advanced, so they probably end up I'm guessing, well, they probably have local counsel for some stuff, but they have, Sabin Vermont in New York, a wonderful firm, was very, very experienced. I've litigated with them as well. But I would say with print journalists that are not of a national level, I think it is unusual. I think it's very unusual. And I will say, I think it's a competitive advantage. If a reporter gets arrested, I can be there faster. I could sometimes I could get the fight in faster. I'm not saying that the competitors wouldn't necessarily fight for it, but oftentimes they'd be a day or two late. And as you know, then you're getting scooped because we've already gotten there, because I could just drive to the courthouse in 15 minutes. And I was also saying I'm a little more well-versed, obviously, because I'm hyper-local. I know the New Jersey ins and outs on how to file these cases and get them done quickly. And if you were to ask a Nebraska lawyer how to file something in New Jersey, Florida, if they were handling all the newspapers for the state, the various states, it'd be much harder for them to navigate it. So it is a subspecialty. And, I was very, very honored to do it, is all I can say. I was just, I always say I'm 24/7, I work for you. I'm here to help you get access. So I think it did help. But a lot of this was really just all on them. They really just were, I was just very lucky to work with some really, really talented reporters. And there's resources out there, by the way. If you all go to work for media outlets, and, you all know, your professors know better than I do, but there are some wonderful, wonderful trade organizations and Reporters Committee and SPJ, and there's wonderful resources. And try to attend as much training, as you can, and ask your editor. Like, no one expected you to know these laws. I would do a lot of training, and I think getting the word out, and it made my job easier as well. And then they could self-help, or I could help assist them. But if you don't ask, you won't know, and you have to find out what the process is. If there is a lawyer, do you get to call him or her directly? Some of the bigger chains or bigger media organizations, you don't really have permission to call a lawyer who's on the clock because of the bills. So you may have to go to your editor may have to go to headquarters, and then there may be a whole procedure on how to get access to a lawyer.
If you had to kind of assign a weight value to the kind of work you've been discussing here, where you either file requests or actually litigate to access to records and documents, versus leakers, whether it's sort of a disgruntled employee, someone who has an axe to grind for some reason. What would you say is more important in your experience? They're sort of equal value, they're just both tools in the toolkit, or if you had to dispense with one and rely only on the other, what would you pick? Because leaking is getting a really bad name lately, you might say.
Leaking is very important. Leaking is, I'd hate to put one over the other. I have a lot more experience with the law, obviously, because they call me to sue to get access. I've had to represent a little bit to not share leaks, or more advising reporters on whether the leak is credible, and what do we do with it, and how do we not unmask it. Obviously, there's maybe negative repercussions if the name was out there, so we want to protect the confidentiality of the leak. I think they're both. I couldn't.
Could you proceed? Could you without leaks?
Yeah, we couldn't get our paper out. No, not the same way.
So it's not like you could proceed just through FOIA requests or through OPRA requests.
I think right. I think we get more verbal leaks now than we used to get through documents. And I don't know if it's because people are worried about Big Brother. I know there's software, because I know another case has nothing to do with journalism, where they could prove that this one employee downloaded files onto a thumb drive. I don't think they could prove that she actually left the building with the thumb drive. And I don't know if they could prove that somebody had hacked into her account if she was saying, I didn't download those documents before I left the company. But I think the idea that if you email it, it's traceable. Particularly if you're emailing it from work, right? Because you never know. I certainly don't understand our IT systems well enough, but I'm sure it's traceable at some point and maybe even copied. So we do get a lot of verbal leaks. We don't, we do get, yeah, meet me in the diner at, 18 towns away because I don't want anyone seeing me with you because I have something really important, a really good scoop to give you. We do get those. But leaking is important. It's very, very important. And, some people like with Snowden, was he a hero? Was a patriot or was he a criminal? But and you also have to, as you said, you have to understand or try to get at, as a reporter particularly, and a lawyer working for the reporters, the motive. Because if you got leaked something from somebody who maybe usually it is a disgruntled employee, but not always. Sometimes it's just, I want to do the right thing here. And maybe it's not jeopardizing a career or putting anyone behind bars, but is there more to it too? Sometimes when reporters will show me what's leaked to them, I'm like, this doesn't either quite add up either, because this document is referencing something else. How come they didn't give you that? So they'll give you their reply to somebody, but they don't give you the letter that they received. So you always know there's two sides, right? So that kind of starts the whole dialogue of like, okay, well, I need something else leaked to me from the letter writer because I'm now seeing the response. But I think that it's very, very important.
We're now out of time.
Okay, well, thank you all.
Thank
you.